Welcome, everyone. I am here today with Courtney Harler, the editor-in-chief of Craft magazine. I'm very excited to hear all about this journal and get to know Courtney a little bit. And welcome to all of you. I'm really excited to be back. I took the summer, I took a month off in the summer. It feels like it's been a while. So I'm happy to be jumping back and to see all of you. So as always, any questions that you have, please just go ahead. Don't hesitate, type them into the chat and I will work them into the conversation with Courtney. And if you could all mute yourselves, that would be great. I hear like a little cat somewhere. So Courtney, hi, how are you? How's it going? How's your summer?
It's been great, too hot, but
Yeah.
everywhere else too hot as well. But it's been a very productive summer, so
Oh,
it's
good.
it's been good. Yeah.
Okay, great. And relatedly, is Craft one of these year-round magazines? So you accept submissions year-round? You guys are working all the time?
hmm
Yeah.
we take a week off here and there from publication, and we take a 2-week break from reading at the end of the year,
Okay.
to give everyone some holiday time. But we're always open for submissions, and we always have free categories.
Sure. Okay. Great. So let's back up a little bit, if you would, and tell us about the origin of the magazine. When did it start and when did you get involved?
Okay. It started in 2017 with the co-founders Kim Winterheimer and Laura Spence-Ash. Laura had a book out this summer, her debut novel, which was really exciting. So we had her come read for us for one of our salons. Um, and it started as a venue for primarily fiction, and then in about 2020, it expanded to include creative nonfiction as well. So now we currently publish short fiction, flash fiction, long form creative nonfiction, flash creative nonfiction, interviews, and essays. Um, and then I was working for our sister literary magazine, the Masters Review. Many of you have probably heard of that as well. As a reader, blog post contributor, I did lots of interviews and essays for them, reviews for the Masters Review, from 2017 or so until 2021, when the editor at the Masters Review put my name in the hat for the new editor-in-chief at Craft. And so I came on in late 2021. So I've been there about a year and a half.
Okay. And for those who don't know, including myself, I don't fully have a sense. What does the editor-in-chief do? Like, are you, and specifically at Craft, are you reading submissions or are you sort of just providing like the bird's eye view on issues as they come out?
I am more of a bird's eye view person. I don't do first reads. I do second and third and fourth and fifth reads, but I don't do first reads because we have a pretty extensive reading team, and I have several section editors, and I like to give the section editors as much autonomy over their section as possible. So pieces come in, they're read by the first readers, they get upvoted to editorial assistants and section editors, and then they're upvoted to me, and then we have a discussion, and it's a collaborative decision. But I tend to not throw my oar in until my section editor tells me that they're really interested in something, because I want them to have that autonomy, and I want them to be able to practice their expertise in their specific section.
Okay. So relatedly, can you take us through that process in a little more detail? It's sort of like, I always think of it, it's like how a bill becomes a law. So take us like how a submission becomes part of the magazine or not part of the magazine, just like who sees it, when, how is it passed along, at what point is it, how is it vetted, who talks to who, just sort of like the nitty-gritty of that process.
Sure. It's a little different for contest submissions as opposed to our free submission categories. So which one would you like me to dig down into?
Let's do the general submissions and then we can talk about contests separately.
Okay. So general submission categories are open year round for free. Anyone can submit. We also have a fast response BIPOC category. So people from historically marginalized groups can submit work and get a quicker response, usually within 4 weeks. Our general response time can be up to 4 to 5 months, because sometimes we have to put a bit of a hold on the free submission category reading in order to clear a contest queue. But generally, when you submit your work, it goes to a first reader. We have a pretty big team. I built it over the summer, which I'm really pleased about. We have such a great team of volunteer readers. They read it first, and at that point, they do have the choice of declining or upvoting. If they see some promise, if they see something that's really special, they'll upvote it to the section editor or an editorial assistant for the section editor. And then that section will have a discussion about the piece. If it's creating some buzz, if it's getting some traction, the whole section will look at it, and then they'll send it on to me. And then I will look, like you said, I will look at that kind of bird's eye view, and I'll look at what we've been publishing, where this might fit in the publication calendar. But if it's a really strong piece, I will fight for it, and I will fight to find a place for it. But that decision is definitely made collaboratively. I don't ever swoop in and say we're taking this or we're not taking that. It's a group discussion. So
sure. And can you tell us the criteria that the readers are using when they evaluate a submission? So I imagine it's more than just, oh, I like this, or maybe that is all it is. But sort of, are they reading with a sense of like if the piece is right for craft magazine specifically? And can you talk about what that means?
So craft, given our name, we're craft based. You know, we're highly literary, yet we will take on some work that leans more towards genre if it has a really strong literary bent. So yes, they are reading primarily for literary work. But we also train them specifically to not look at a like or dislike situation. We have anti-bias training in which we train all of our readers in how to look at work more objectively. It's a very subjective process, but we train them to look at it objectively and not specifically from their place in the world or even their training as a writer and a reader. So we're very interested in supporting, upholding, uplifting diverse voices that have been historically marginalized, especially in publishing. So before they read anything, they do the anti-bias training. So we train them to not look at their own, not to read through their own lens, but to read through a craft lens. And so, craft markers would be, is this character fully developed? Is this narrative fully developed? Is the language, effective? And is it clear enough to reach the reader? We're always thinking about our readership. Sometimes we could get something that's highly lyrical, but maybe just wouldn't land with our readership. We are actively training the reader to, and myself, I'm always thinking about this, and my section editors are always thinking about how to, it's not a like or dislike. That's like not really sound pedagogy when it comes to workshopping and when it comes to reviewing work. It's more, will this piece resonate with the broader audience? Does it have resonance in the world? Does it look at something from a new angle? Does it express and capture a truly authentic voice? So those are all craft markers that aren't about like or dislike. And my readers always have an option of, they can say, I've read this piece, it doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but I think it might with other readers. And so they can ask for an extra reader on that piece, or they can ask me to review it or a section editor to review it instead. So I push them far away from that like or dislike language, because I don't find that it's just not objective enough. And we're working within a highly subjective field to begin with. So the more objective markers that we can create, the better. We can be fair and we can promote work that is valid and important, and not just through our own lenses and not just through our own perspectives.
It's interesting. It seems like some part of that would be also giving the writer the benefit of the doubt, which is something
Mhm.
I think we all sort of have to learn again and again as readers, like something that might strike us as, initially we don't like it on first read, and then we sort of realize, well, this writer is probably doing that deliberately. We're
Yes,
giving them the
yes.
benefit of the
Mhm.
doubt that they actually know what they're doing. And maybe that thing that chafes us on first read is actually intentional.
Mhm.
On a second read can actually be genius, or like the innovation that writer is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
The question is this writer achieving
Mm,
what we think they've set out to do? And are they achieving it in such a way that it will resonate with our readership?
mhm,
Um, and that really has nothing to do with personal preference. You have to
mhm,
remove personal preference from that, even personal style, or even certain craft markers or certain grammatical markers
mhm,
that we've been taught are correct or incorrect. We look beyond that, and we look at voice, and we look at authenticity, and we look at intentionality in the
mhm.
piece.
Is it correct to say that the style of the work hews more toward character driven and sort of um, traditional in the sense of like plot development and narrative arc? It sounds like you're not that interested in more experimental stuff.
We really do actually like speculative work
Mm,
if it has depth, if it has literary depth.
mhm,
So it would be very unlikely for us to publish something that's, say, pure fantasy or pure romance.
mm,
But if something has like some of the markers of fantasy or romance or science fiction, but has real literary depth, and like I said, that kind of authenticity and intentionality in the voice,
mhm,
we would definitely consider it. Most of our short stories are speculative. The one
mm.
we just published is highly speculative.
This is not on my list of questions, but it just popped into my mind. And I'm asking editors this more and more because you mentioned authenticity and voice. And I'm
Mhm.
curious if you're dealing with like the AI situation. How are you navigating that?
Um, we have publicly stated on our site that unless specifically requested, we will not accept AI
Mhm.
work, because we're
Mhm.
not ruling out something maybe fun in the future to play with the
Mhm.
idea.
Right.
But at this time, but we don't, across the industry, we don't really have good tools for detecting it either.
Yeah.
I just hope that we as readers can recognize a real
Mhm.
a real writer as opposed to an AI writer.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you had those conversations like where you're starting to see submissions and you're wondering like, is this written by a human? Sort of
Um,
a question we never really considered in the past, but
yeah, we've talked about it generally with the leadership team, and with our sister Litmags. In addition to being the editor-in-chief of Craft, I'm also editorial director for Discover New Art, which is our umbrella organization.
hmm,
Um, and I meet regularly with the other editors in chief, and no one yet has said, I think this is AI. What should I do? So
mhm,
we we really haven't come across it yet in a practical sense, but
hmm,
we're talking theory all the time and
hmm,
what this means. I think there are some like AI detectors being developed at this point, and that would be very useful to us. We all use a plagiarism tracker just in case,
hmm,
before we publish something,
hmm,
because we generally don't publish um, previously published material either. We generally don't do reprints. So we always check for that. Um, I'm hoping that someday there'll be a checker for AI, but I feel like, anything that I've read by AI so far, there's a stagnation to the voice that I
hmm.
hope we would all recognize.
Right, right. Yeah, I found that
Yeah.
too. The concern is when it gets more advanced. I think right now we're in
Right.
a moment where it's like, yeah, we can recognize it, but yeah, it's sort of
Hmm.
looming
Yeah.
concern. So going back, you mentioned Discover New Art. For those who
Hmm.
don't know, it's sort of there's this umbrella organization and these affiliated lit mags, right? So you mentioned Masters Review, and it's
Hmm.
also Fractured Lit, Frontier Poetry, Uncharted, uh,
Hmm.
Am I missing any? Or just...
Yes, you got most of them. So
Okay.
we started with the very first Litmag was the Master's Review.
Mhm.
It was a platform for emerging writers, and then the folks who started that, one of them being Kim Winterheimer, wanted to start something similar for poets, an emerging platform for emerging poets, and so that's how Frontier came about. And then Craft and Palette came about because they wanted a platform for everyone. So they're having, they're having good success publishing great material, gaining traction in the literary world that had a sustainable method of, running these lit mags. So they started to branch out, and Craft and Palette Poetry came along right after TMR and
Mhm.
Frontier.
Mhm.
And then the purpose of Discover New Art has always been to serve the literary community. So the owners are very interested in innovation and new ways to do that, new ways to reach new readers, and new ways to create opportunities for contemporary writers. So after TMR, Frontier, Craft, and Palette were very settled and doing very well, in their publication schedule and stuff like that, they decided to branch out just a little bit more. So then there was Fractured for Flash, an Uncharted magazine for genre fiction, and then there was also Voyage for young adult literature. But Voyage never quite found its traction, so we've folded it back under Uncharted now. We've made it a kind of category under the Uncharted. So now it is Voyage by Uncharted. And that's not to say that there aren't, years down the road, other lit mags that may come about, but we just have that core set of 6 right now.
Sure. And there's a nice comment here from a reader. I love many of these journals, and I had no idea that they were all affiliated. So,
As a TMR reader, because this all happened behind the scenes, I didn't realize that until late in the game either. I didn't realize that Craft and TMR were affiliated until much later in the game. Because they've just, they've grown up organically through, the innovation and the support of the owners. TMR did change hands. There's like a father-son duo now who runs DNA as our CEO and CFO.
With DNA, oh, Discover New Art. Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, Discover New Art.
Sure.
And there's a website for Discover New Art. It's discovernewart.com, and it has all our platforms there. But we like to maintain the uniqueness and the individuality of each platform too. So we have some centralized processes like, billing and marketing, accounting and marketing, but every editor-in-chief is given, authority to shape the lit mag and to run the lit mag in the way that they see best.
Sure. And some of these lit mags overlap. So like Fractured Lit is for flash fiction, and maybe flash nonfiction as well.
I think they mostly do fiction. There
Yeah.
might be a few CNF pieces there. For the most part, Craft does the most flash CNF.
Okay.
TMR does a little bit. But yes, there's overlap for flash, especially between the Master's Review, Craft, and Fractured. Yeah.
So how does a writer distinguish, like if they have a flash fiction piece, how do they know if it's right for Craft or Fractured Lit? And is that something that you talk about in the staff meetings? Like, okay, we want to sort of differentiate ourselves from one another.
Yes, absolutely. We think about that all the time. And even when we design contests, we think about like, is this kind of a fractured contest, or is this more of a craft contest, So for Craft, again, we're looking for pretty much high literary. For Fractured Lit, it's also very literary, but there's a kind of play in flash that might find a better home over at Fractured because they're so focused on just flash.
Yeah.
It's a little like, it's a little hard to describe because I wouldn't describe Fractured Lit as, say, a genre focused magazine, but there's just a little more play over there as opposed to like what we might publish at Craft. Not to say we don't like play in the work at Craft. Again, we we love the speculative stuff. We love highly lyrical stuff as long as it still lands with the reader. That's probably, the question is probably best put to my flash fiction section editor, who's not here right now because she has a certain aesthetic as well.
Mm.
She definitely leans more toward the speculative, but does not lean toward the vignette, if that makes sense. I think you might find more of a type of flash vignette at Fractured than you would at Craft. But I would say the opposite is true for our Flash CNF, because our Flash CNF section editor, or just our CNF section editor, Jacqueline Doyle, does love those very highly lyrical vignettes, memoiristic vignettes. Yeah.
So that's really interesting that you describe the work that you favor as high literary, but also there's a lot of speculative. So can you tell us, it might be something that's sort of ineffable and hard to define, like, you know it when you see it, but can you tell us, like, what is that sweet spot? Let's say a writer has a short flash piece that they've written and there's something a little bit surreal about it. There's a speculative element, you know, maybe all the characters have wings. That's just part of the story. They all have wings. They're people, but they all have wings. So there's a little bit of a kind of surreal element. But it sounds like to be right for craft, it needs more than just that surreal speculative component. So take us, like, what is that sweet spot? How should a writer look for it in their own work to identify whether it's right for your magazine? Would it be a matter of, like, focusing more on the character development, on language, setting, all of those things?
All of those things should be fully realized, but I'd say what the deal breaker is does the piece have a core impetus that it drives toward? Does it all come together in the end? Does that surrealism, what's the word? Does that surrealism serve a purpose other than bells and whistles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So it's not just, isn't this cool? This is like this weird idea that I came up with and I wrote a story about it. Which, you know, that's very cool. I think there is a place for that, and probably more in like sci-fi territories, kind of like, what if, you know, what if everybody had wings? But it sounds like you're also seeking that kind of more, what is the meaning? What is the philosophical or kind of,
and it doesn't have to be explicit, but there is an implied depth or an implied depth of character or depth of, like, emotional connection. Does it provide an empathetic connection to the reader, or is it just like clever? You know, we don't tend to go for the purely clever. If it's clever, if it's clever without depth, we would call that cute, and we would probably pass. So yeah, I mean, it just has to have a real core to it at some point. It has to have some weight to it, some literary weight.
Have there been any in your editorial process, like any pieces that are sort of different, that are sort of disputed over? And can you take us into, you know, maybe not necessarily name the piece, but just tell us what were the pros and the cons of the piece, and how is that settled, and did it make it into the magazine, and sort of into that, shed some light in that process?
Yeah. So what we do in that case, if we have kind of a divided, you know, team, if we have people who really love a piece and people who are like, it's not quite, what we would do is offer an R&R, or a revise and resubmit. So the editor who's, you know, just not quite satisfied, we'd probably task them with giving the writer some very clear notes on the piece and asking that they would be interested in engaging in a revision with us. So that is something that only Craft does at Discover New Art. It's very rare for any of the other Litmags to do that. And we also have, because of our focus on craft, I inherited the Litmag this way and inherited it with this system. We have a 2-month editorial process with every piece we publish. So we don't publish anything willy-nilly. We don't take something 1 week and publish it the next. So it would be at least 2 months. And often we take pieces several months in advance so that we can prepare for that process. But if we're very, very interested in a piece, or have, an editor who wants to champion a piece, but yet it's not quite there yet, or someone has notes on why it's not quite there yet, we would offer that to the writer. And that's, something that we do above and beyond, what is normally done. And we have never had a complaint about that process, to be honest, in my tenure. There's never been a complaint. The writers have always found it very fruitful. And most writers will post about their experience with us as an editorial team. We give it a very close eye. Pieces that we accept outright, we do not delve very deeply into content editing. We keep that kind of editing to mostly copy editing, proofreading. If there's, a few points of clarity here and there that we would ask for, we would do that. But if we feel that a piece has exceptional promise, or we have a bunch of people fighting for it and some people resistant, that R&R is our best option there. But that R&R can take several months. We don't rush the writer on that. We give them time to absorb our feedback and to consider whether they'd like to enter into that process with us. In which case, there might be several back and forth. In the end, we may actually not take the piece because it just didn't get to where we thought it should be. Ultimately, I will have to make a decision on something like that. I will have to make a call with the input of the editors. Most of the time we will take it, but we don't enter into an R&R lightly. We don't do that lightly. If a piece is too far off for us, we have so many others in our queue that we just send a lovely thanks, but no thanks, and try us again next year, or, in 6 months. So, yeah.
We have a comment here. It really is amazing to get feedback like that. As someone who has done a similar process with an anthology, I can attest that it is both time consuming for the staff and incredibly valuable for the writer. Yeah, I think it's true.
Yeah.
Because of the magazine's focus on craft, do you tend to see a lot of submissions that feel too crafted? And how do you handle that? I imagine like there's we'll talk about also the essays on craft, which is a whole other part of the site service that you provide. But that's also like a conversation a lot of writers have, like that's sort of like the MFA story, where it sort of hits all the right notes, but somehow doesn't have that authenticity that you were talking about. And I'm curious if that's something specifically that you see a lot at your magazine.
Again, it's hard for me to speak to that exactly because I don't do first reads. Like I deliberately keep out of the way unless absolutely necessary for me to jump in. But if I manage the team and the assignments correctly, it's usually not a problem. So there has been some work that has reached my desk, though, that I have found that the voice is too flat or too clean, too careful, right? So I could not speak to like the percentage of that comes in on the first round, but I can say that on occasion I do find something. What happens is it sort of lacks interest. It lacks intrigue because it's been perhaps clarified too much or written too heavily. Normally I would call that like a heavy-handed narration I'm being told too much and not shown enough, even though that distinction is kind of arbitrary. It would be very hard to give you a percentage though of that. We do get a full gamut of, I do talk to my readers regularly, and we do get a full gamut of material though, like across the board. We still get a lot of genre work, even though we don't really publish genre work unless it has, those certain markers. So we do get just a a whole variety of material. And, you know, there are pieces out there that are perfectly wonderful, but maybe they just lack that pizzazz or that real authenticity or that real resonance on the page.
Sure. So let's talk about the craft essays that you publish. What are you looking for in craft essays? And does a writer need to have a certain set of qualifications to write a craft essay? Do they need to have like published a novel or a story collection, for instance, or can they just be like kind of a beginning or emerging writer, but they really have an opinion or something to say on some aspect of craft? What do you look for in those? And also, like, do you find the subjects are running out? I imagine like 10 years of craft essays. You might feel like, okay, what else can we possibly say about the craft?
Yeah. I will say that I think initially when I came into craft, the essays seemed to have a little more of an academic bent, which is fine. So it was probably, you know, a lot of MFA students sending in the craft essays that they had to write for their packets, you know. And a lot of those are beautifully done. Lately, though, as you say, like, you know, there's only so many ways to approach setting or approach dialogue or approach, you know, voice or point of view. We've been leaning toward a more lyrical type of craft essay that is almost a creative nonfiction narrative, but yet it's heavily focused on craft. The last 3 craft essays that we've published have been very lyrical, and they're not in any way a how-to. They're not really in any way, you know, let me look at this story and parse it for you, or, you know, they're more about the writers and readers' direct, intimate response to work or to their own work. So I would say that's where we're headed. Like the piece we put up today is actually a flash craft essay, which should be the first time we've done that ever, I think. Yeah, it's a very short essay, but it's very impactful, very powerful. It's by Sarah Twombly. It's called Life, the Universe, and Everything, a primer on the writing of autofiction. I may not have that exactly right, but that's the gist of it.
Okay.
So we'd never really published a piece on autobiographical fiction or autofiction and what that means to a writer, and this piece hit that mark. So we are definitely looking at unique ways of approaching the craft. If you send us, you know, a detailed analysis of, you know, a story by Amy Bender or, you know, anyone who's currently writing, or, you know, the new James McBride novel, you know, it may not hit because it may be a little too academic, and it may not have enough of an interesting angle, because like you say, we are kind of reaching a critical mass at that point. Like there are so many craft essays. I will say though that if a craft essay is geared more toward the emerging writer or written very clearly by an emerging writer, I might refer them to Cole Meyer at TMR and see if he'd like to pick it up. So we do kind of share across the board.
Is there any commentary? I didn't see this, but for some reason I thought that the magazine did this. Like when a story is published, is there any kind of commentary by the editors to say, like what it exemplifies about the craft and why it was chosen?
Yep. We do an introduction for every creative piece.
Okay.
We don't do them for interviews and essays, but we do them for all of our flash and all of our stories or you know, creative nonfiction essays. And what my editors are encouraged to do is kind of isolate just 1 or 2 specific craft techniques or markers, and we discuss that. And then the piece is tagged with those markers because we do want craft to be useful in the classroom.
Yeah.
In the creative writing classroom, we definitely want it to be very useful there. And instructors have written in to tell us that it is indeed very useful to them. So.
That's great. Yeah, I was wondering about that too. So do you work actively with teachers, professors, or do they just find the work on the site and use it?
We haven't had a formal partnership yet, but that's something I'm open to. I have taught creative writing and freshman composition, and you know what MFA and MA graduates generally teach, adjunct at some point. So
Yeah.
I would love that type of collaboration, but mostly they just write in and say, hey, I used this in my classroom and it was great.
Mhm.
Another thing we do that I don't, as far as I can tell, very other few people do, is we have every creative writer who publishes with us, even contest winners, we ask them to write an author's note about the craft in their piece.
Mm.
So not only do we get the perspective of the craft from our editorial team with the introduction, but we get the perspective of the craft from the writer's point of view.
Mhm. Okay.
And we work on that piece with them too, and we help them polish it up before we publish it. So there's like a badge on the page that it looks like, the ribbon from like a dog and pony show or something that says author's note, and you click on that, and that takes you into the process of the writer, which
Mhm.
is invaluable. Like, you don't really get that anywhere else.
Yeah.
And most writers say they love writing that, and most readers say they love reading those author's notes. I think when I was at AWP a couple years ago, untold numbers of people came up to the booth and told me how much they loved our author's notes.
Yeah, I love those too. I think
Yeah.
One Story does that. And also like in the best American short stories when you read
Mhm. Yeah,
inspired.
you'll have that in the back. It's just, yeah,
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
very few Litmags do it, but a lot of
Right,
the anthologies do. And
right.
when I read those anthologies, I often read the stories first, and then I read all the notes, and then I go back and read
Yeah,
the stories
same.
again.
Yeah,
It's like this circular process that I learned
right.
so much from, just, looking at that intent. And, in the past, in a MFA workshop, it was, the cone of silence. Don't try to explain your story. Don't give us any preface. The work should stand on its own. But we've learned, especially through the work of, Matthew Salaces and Felicia Rose Chavez, that those workshops are pretty ineffective because it's like stripping the writer from their work or the work from the writer. And that is not in reality what's happening. Like,
Mhm.
we as writers are intimately connected with our work, and we have, like you said, we have intention behind our work. And if we don't give writers space for that voice, or space for that benefit of the doubt, I think is the term that you used earlier, like, we're just flattening the work into some cookie cutter kind of project. And that is definitely, not what we want at Craft. We want as much diversity as possible. We want as much voice. We want as much authenticity. I hesitate to use the word originality because that it's kind of loaded, but if it originates from you, that's what we want to see.
Mhm.
That's the kind of originality we want to see. We don't necessarily need like the most cleverest, that's ungrammatical, the cleverest piece you can provide, right? We want to see what originates from you. What is a story only you can tell, whether fiction or nonfiction? You know, you have a unique angle. You are not a cliche. You have the power to create this story, and only you do. And that is ideally what we're looking for and what we want to celebrate.
Mhm. What portion of writers that are published are new writers?
At Craft,
Mhm.
um, surprisingly a lot. I don't have a specific number, but we get really excited when we find someone who's never published before and they're sending us something really interesting. I know that we published last summer, we published a brand new writer, and we ended up nominating her story for a big prize. It didn't win, but it deserved the nomination.
Mhm.
And then I think two of our prize winners in the past 2 years, it was like their first big publication.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't have a specific number on that. I'd have to go count through,
Yeah.
and I could really only account for like the past year and a half because I would know. But we keep an eye on that because there is that Penn Award for, the debut writer, the debut short story writer. I do not think we've had a couple debut essays, like people who have never published this year in particular. But we're entirely open to it. I mean, it's a platform that's open to all. You can have published 10 books and still submit to Craft.
Mhm.
Whereas at the Master's Review, you can't have published a lot of books. You have to be technically really an emerging writer.
Mhm.
But we're open to everyone, but we're always looking for that new writer that we could support, especially if they're from a historically marginalized group and they're not getting the opportunities we think that they should have otherwise. We want to champion that.
I just want to drive that point home because sometimes people ask me in the submissions Q&A sessions, and I want people to know you should not be discouraged if you have no previous publishing credits. It sounds like this is a great home. Just say, in your cover letter, this would be my first publication, and there's not going to be any kind of bias against you.
No,
Yeah.
it would actually, if you state that specifically in your bio, we would look even a little bit more closely
That's
at your
great.
piece. Yeah, because that's really exciting for me as an editor-in-chief to launch someone.
Mhm.
It's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a question that was actually my next question. Does craft solicit work?
We do not.
Um,
It's just how the founders started. I might meet people when I go to a conference or I'm out professionally networking and they say, I have this great story about something, and I would say, wow, that sounds really interesting, send it in.
mhm.
But that's not a solicitation. That's me just encouraging people to try us if they'd like. Yeah, we don't. I think the only time any work was solicited was when they launched the CNF section, and they did solicit a few reprints just to launch that section, but we don't solicit in any other way.
And our cover letters, it sounds like you do read the cover letters to get a sense of who the writer is. So they are important. They're not going to sway the decision one way or another, but you do look at the cover letters.
Yes, we do look at them, but mostly like we might skim them to start just in case we need to know if a person is coming from a particular background or a particular country, because we take international submissions too that might cause certain inflections in the voice. We skim for that, and then if the story stands, we go back and look a little more closely at the bio, and then it gets upvoted through the chain. But I in particular will look at that bird's eye view and make sure that we are publishing 50, 60, 70% diverse authors.
And I had a question. I was just sort of like poking around on the site, and I saw something that I don't typically see on the site, which is about data and sort of privacy concerns. So can you just reassure me if I visit the craft site and I read stories that somehow my this isn't exactly related to the submissions process, but I noticed it. It's not common to see that on Litmag sites. There's like a whole page about the user's privacy and information that's being collected and so on. And I really appreciate the transparency, but I was also like, okay, Courtney's gonna reassure me here that my data is not being somehow harvested by, by the magazine.
Well, when you submit, you automatically subscribe to the newsletter.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But then you can unsubscribe if you'd like. And we do track clicks on the site just as a Google Analytics kind of thing.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's more of like a measuring tool.
Yeah, I mean your email will be funneled in some ways,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have a question here going back to the diversity topic. Are older writers considered diverse, underrepresented voices? That's something that comes up a lot because I think sadly older writers tend not to be seen. They're not as visible, in the art world. So that's something I've talked about a lot with my readers. So yeah, I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah. I think I just saw that question flash up, and it was from a 75-year-old poet. Is that the question you're referencing in the chat?
I don't know the writer's identity, but it just says, are older writers considered diverse, underrepresented voices? Oh,
Okay.
that's the next question.
There's a
Sorry.
follow-up.
Yeah. So we have two people,
Okay.
two people who are concerned about that. Yeah.
Okay. So absolutely yes. We consider persons of color, persons with disabilities or other, physical challenges, persons who have maybe a history of mental health challenges, older people, LGBTQ, we consider those all persons of historically marginalized groups. And we might use the term BIPOC as kind of an umbrella, but we say BIPOC and other historically marginalized groups. But if ever if you have a question, if you fit into that category, you can always email us and we'll answer that right away. But definitely, we love work from people of all ages. In fact, we sometimes get work from like high school seniors, 16, 17, 18 years old, and we keep an eye on that. And we are sure to, we've not published anyone that young, but we are sure to encourage them and sure to send them a personalized response. There was another part of that question. At this time, Craft does not publish poetry, but you can go to Frontier Poetry or Palette Poetry, and you can find a home there. And all of the DNA platforms are very invested in diversity, and we define diversity pretty broadly too.
We just have a comment here that there are more than two older writers. One person said she's 80 and unpublished, which I just think is so awesome. And I actually had a reader, I think, in my newsletter who commented, I think he was 86 and he had just published like his first poetry collection. So it's awesome. But it is like, there's no denying in the Litmag world, when you read what tends to get published and, these contests for like 35 and under, and, it definitely is discouraging.
Yeah, we published an interview with like a debut novelist. I think he debuted at 75, 80. So last year we published an interview with him because we wanted to, touch on that. It was done by Suzanne Roberts. If you want to Google that on the page, I can get you guys a link. But definitely, yeah, we want to support, writers of, all backgrounds and all experiences. And I do see across the board in the industry that, young and hot seems to be like, their work's on fire, seems to be a mode. But we're not stuck with that. I mean, really, it's, it's the work. Does the work stand, and a person's age or experience can really enrich that voice and enrich that work. And if that comes through on the page, then that's something we're definitely interested in.
That's great. So let's say somebody's listening to this, they're like, this sounds great. I have a piece. I think it's perfect for this magazine. Can you offer any final things that they should just go back and look for in the piece? Like, just make sure there are no excess adverbs or, just any kind of like little insights that they can take away and apply to their work now before they submit it.
I've been actually thinking about this question a lot this week, because stylistically there are these traditional markers, like don't use a lot of adverbs, don't show, don't tell. There are all these, rules. But I have found that some of the most successful pieces are the ones who flout all of those rules, but the voice is so authentic and engaging and compelling and propulsive that it works, even though it flouts all those rules. So I would actually hesitate to say anything prescriptive at this point, because I have learned, especially in this past year and a half, that I've published pieces that, especially on the line, are not stylistically aligned with what I would write or what I would normally read, but they were really powerful pieces that deserve to be published. So I would say that if you're going to break the rules, make sure that's intentional, and know the rules, but know when they don't serve you. That's so what we're looking for, no matter the age or experience of the writer, is just someone who writes very intentionally and believes in their story, fiction or nonfiction, and can put that power behind it. I know that word power, I think, has become problematic for me too, because it lends itself toward a hierarchical dynamic that I don't really love. But there's kind of like no other way to describe it. Like, does this work, you know, reach me in a way that no other work would on this particular subject, or for this particular character, or this particular narrator, or this particular place and time and moment. You can do that and not follow any of the rules, and the piece can rise above,
Yeah.
and all the rules can be broken, and the piece can be so successful that it just becomes a new thing, you know, something entirely new. And that would be lovely to see. So I hesitate to give any rules at this point. And honestly, it's really just been this week or this past 2 weeks when I've really been thinking about how to articulate what I've learned through this process, and about rules and about style guides. Because I'm a pretty strict Chicago, manual of style, and we do edit to that, but we always defer to the voice, or we always defer to the style if the writer has made an intentional voice to break with Chicago. So the rules, the further I've gotten into this role, the rules have become less and less important to me. And what is more important to me is honoring the voice of the writer, uplifting that voice, getting this story told, getting this story out there because it's important and it's resonant and it belongs in the world.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, a lot of questions here. Do you accept memoir excerpts from seniors? From our one of our 75 years old participant. And I just to sort of broaden that too, because I saw that you do accept excerpts. So are those memoir excerpts and novel excerpts? And if so, just very, very quickly, because I know we're almost out of time here. Just what makes a strong excerpt?
So it depends on what you submit to. If you submit to our general categories and excerpt, we kind of like that to stand alone and to be encapsulated within itself. Like, you could read it and feel fulfilled as a reader. You may want to know more and you may be curious about more, but the piece itself should feel cohesive and complete if it's submitted to the general categories. But twice a year now, we're starting something kind of new coming up in November. We've just finished our first chapters contest. So those are excerpts from the first chapters of your novels, and those won't be complete and they won't stand alone. We're just looking for like exceptional promise in what can be a really great novel. So that we don't publish novels, but that's our way of like supporting those endeavors of those writers who are working on novels for years at a time. Show us your first chapters. We'll award you if it's beautiful and we think you should keep going, you know. And often agents come to the site and look at those winners, you know, they're scouting for that on our site. Something we're starting in November for the first time. We used to have a creative nonfiction award every year, which was just for general creative nonfiction, could include flash as well. This year, we're morphing it more into a memoir excerpt and essays contest. So we're going to be looking specifically for memoir excerpts and memoiristic essays come November. So that'll be a contest that'll be open from like mid-November to mid-January to help give you a little more time over the holiday to straddle that.
That's great. Yeah, so
that
polish that memoir excerpt and enter it. That sounds perfect. Yeah.
So for just to reiterate, for the general category, we'd like to see more of a standalone piece, but for these special contests, they can be pure excerpts that do not actually stand alone, that just really entice your readers to come see what else you're doing. So
yeah, I actually entered the Master's Review first chapter contest.
Yes, they have one too.
Did not win, but I'm still I'm okay. So we have another question. I've gotten a couple tiered rejections, which I really appreciate. It's hard to know what to do next. Keep submitting, change up something in my approach. I'm unclear whether the tiered rejections are from craft specifically. But if you want to just speak to that, how should a writer take a tiered rejection? Yes, from craft. Okay, great, thanks. So how should a writer take a tiered rejection from craft? And how should they take a form rejection? If a writer gets 3 or 4 form rejections, should they stop, or is persistence really the name of the game?
I would say persistence is the name of the game. If you have been receiving form rejections from craft and elsewhere, persistence is definitely in your favor, but if you are actively working to, improve or elevate your craft in some way.
Mm.
So, just sending something out to 100 places, which ironically I did do when I first when I first got into this game, 10, 15 years ago, probably won't get you anywhere. So in that instance, I had a story that I had sent out to many, many places, probably 100 places, because I thought it had real legs and I thought it had a real place. I thought it would find its place in the world, but it didn't until there's a radical revision technique in which you set the manuscript aside and you rewrite from scratch with the story in your mind, with the characters in your mind, but you were right entirely from scratch. When I rewrote that story from scratch, it landed almost immediately. So don't do what I did. Don't do that 100 times. But if you are actively, revising the work, or you're actively working towards something new, maybe a piece is a dud and you have to rewrite it, or you have to come at it from a different angle. I also had a story out there that kept getting close. It was getting kind of like honorable mentions and nods, but it couldn't land anywhere. It couldn't find a place. I radically rewrote that. I condensed it into a flash creative nonfiction essay, and then it won a contest. So consider radical revision. I would say that if your piece keeps falling flat, or if you keep getting form rejections, if you get there, we have a couple tiers. We have what we call normal, like your form rejection, and then we have a nice one that's more encouraging, and then we have a personalized one, which is our third level, in which we were probably pretty close to taking that piece, but it didn't quite make our calendar, or didn't quite make the mark that we were looking for a specific spot in our calendar. So if you get a personalized rejection from craft, you should definitely resubmit, and we say that in the letter. If you get a nice rejection, you should also be resubmitting, but you should also be looking very closely at your craft and what you could do to improve it. We can't provide, personalized feedback to everyone. Well, we can if you pay us. We have an editorial feedback program. If you pay for that, we can do that because we have a team of consultants that I pay to do that. But, just in our general free cues, if you get that highest level of personalized rejection, if it has a note from a section editor or a note from me or something very specific about your piece, that's a personalized rejection. And that means you were very, very, very close, and we were actually sad to let your piece go, but we had to for whatever reason. There are a lot of other reasons too that would prevent us from publishing something that we love. It just maybe it doesn't fit in the schedule, or maybe there's just one other piece that's just a little bit more perfect for that spot. It's, if you get that personalized rejection, please do resubmit. Keep working on your craft. Please do resubmit. I would say if you get a personalized rejection from craft, you may even land that piece elsewhere without revision, because it was that close. It was that close to being published.
And just to clarify, when you say resubmit, you don't mean edit the piece and then resubmit that piece?
No, because we will have made a pretty firm decision on that piece. If we want that piece, but it's not quite right, that's when we do the R&R. We do the revise and resubmit. So if we want you to work on this same piece, we will ask you to do it, and we'll ask if you would like to enter into that process with us. So, but at the same time, if you submit 1 year to the first chapters contest and it doesn't go anywhere, and you revise it and your first chapters are different the next time, you can resubmit that, the next year. If it's radically different, under a new name, or, radically revised, yes, you can feel free to resubmit that. But the piece generally as it is, if we've rejected it, then we're ready to move on from that point. But you might find a home for it somewhere else if it was personally, declined. So
and we have kind of a big question here, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're just at the 1 hour mark, so maybe if you can if you want to answer it very concisely, but it's a big question. So many Litmags seem to be folding these days for financial reasons, which is absolutely true. What's the basic situation basic financial situation for craft and the DNA platform generally, e.g. university support, angel investor grants, endowment? And also relatedly, it's amazing that you do not charge submission fees.
That is a big question, and I will try to answer it as concisely as possible. So we are not a not-for-profit organization. We are a for-profit organization, but those profits are plowed back into the platforms. And we do not charge for regular submissions anything, because we do have the regular contests. And the contests are the source of our sustainability. Through the contests, we pay the editors, we pay our judges, we pay our submittable fees, we pay our marketing fees, we pay our just general business fees. Like if, you know, the COO needs a monitor, you know, like this, all of that comes out of the contest structure. And that is the structure that the original owners and the original founders of the Masters Review decided upon as a source of independent sustainability. So we don't go around asking for grants or endowments or anything like that. We are self-sustained through the contests. And we pay really lovely prizes for contests too. And that all sustains that. I know in the industry there's pushback against that, but that is how we have managed to stay in the business. Not only, you know, TMR has been around since 2010 now, so we're coming up on 13 years, I think, for TMR. Stay in the business this long. I have worked for not-for-profit Litmags, and they were lovely and they were beautiful, and I believed in that mission, but they folded. They just couldn't sustain it because they were dependent upon friends making donations, endowments from universities. Like the editor-in-chief every year would go around literally begging for money. And that is how it is with a lot of Litmags, because they are often labors of love. They are often, you know, brainchilds of people who just want to put this Litmag out in the world. But our organization has acted differently from the get-go and was geared towards sustainability. And the contests are the way that we make that happen.
Great. And so just a few more questions. Are you seeking volunteer readers? Is there a way for people to get involved with the magazine? And how should they, if so, how should they contact you?
I just built my team, and I usually put a call out once or twice a year, as do the other Litmags. But if you had a particular interest either in craft or one of the other DNA magazines, reading from them, you could just email me directly and we'll have a chat, and I'll try to find a place for you.
And so what's on the near horizon for you? It sounds like you have a memoir excerpt contest coming up, and you're always open for submissions. When is the next issue coming out, and any other contests coming up?
We do rolling issues, so we don't do a monthly issue. I do have a monthly calendar and a monthly publication schedule that I look at, you know, over the course of the whole year and month to month as well. So we publish kind of continuously, either once or twice a week online. And the next thing that we have coming up is our Flash Prose Prize, which is going to be open to all Flash Prose, fiction or nonfiction, and it will be guest judged by Kathy Fish, who is like a really big name in the Flash industry. Yeah, the goddess of Flash. We're so excited to work with her. And so that opens on September 1st. And then we're also having an editorial feedback event throughout September, wherein you can send in work. You can always do this, send in work for feedback, but this event will have a couple extra little perks that come along with it, as a way of letting people know that this option is always available to them. And we have a wonderful team of consultants who provide really thorough and really enriching and engaged feedback with your work. We always get so many compliments on this team of consultants and the work that they do for people who submit to that. So September through October will be the Flash Prose Prize. Just September will be the editorial feedback event. Early October, we're going to have our fall salon. It's an online reading, and Kathy Fish will be the featured reader. And then we'll have some contributors read some Flash with her as well. So that'll be a lovely online event if you like that sort of event. And then from November to January is the memoir an essays contest. And then there's something very special coming up in the beginning of 2024, which I cannot speak to yet, but it will be
Can you give us a
something we
hint?
well, it's just not set in stone yet, but it will be something we've never done before.
Okay.
Maybe
Not much of a
I'll
hint,
come
but-
back in a few months and tell you a little more about it.
Okay.
We just don't have all the details
Okay.
outlined yet, but it is something I'm particularly very excited about, and
Cool.
it's something that Craft will have never done before, and it will
Okay.
be, I think it'll be really exciting for writers.
Sure. Okay, great. And one final question. I ask this of all editors, which is just what keeps you going? We know this is a lot of work. For many editors, it's a labor of love, and you're balancing teaching, your own writing, family, all that stuff. So what keeps you excited? What keeps you committed? What keeps you going here?
I would say the willingness of this team to innovate keeps me really excited. Just like kind of across the board, because I not only like, try to innovate for Craft, but I also think of ways to help innovate for the other Litmags. And through that collaboration, we're always coming up with new ideas, new ways to serve writers and to serve the literary community. And as long as we're all moving forward and, celebrating the work that we think is really important to see in our pages and on our sites, that keeps me going. That's really satisfying.
Yeah.
I can tell you though that the one thing that I love most about my job, this is the top thing that I love most about my job, is when I get to personally write to a writer and tell them that they're about to be published, or that we would like to publish them, or that they've won one of our big prizes.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the most glorious feeling, because I know as a writer myself how hard it is to get that recognition. And I know that it sounds a little bit like mercenary when I say the money is important, but it actually is. It's actually really important for a creative to be honored, for their work to be valued in that way, for us to put, for us to give $1,000 or $2,000 to a writer. It might make the world of difference to them. It might pay their rent for the next month or two so that they can write more and don't have to freelance gig and drive Uber and like all these things that writers do when they're trying to focus on their work. It's really, really important to me to support writers in that way, and that is actually the high point of any contest or any publication cycle, is when I get to say, we would like to publish your work, or congratulations, you've won this prize. And they write back with such like enthusiasm, and I'm grateful to them and they're grateful to me. It's really like the purest pleasure I have in this job.
Yeah.
And that every time I get to do that is just another reason for me to keep going and to keep providing these opportunities for other writers.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. I really appreciate you taking the time today. This was super interesting.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. So great to see you. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye-bye.